My aunt was the one who said it out loud. Everyone else was thinking it, but she was the one who actually opened her mouth. "So what are you doing now, honey? Still figuring things out?" It was Thanksgiving. My grandmother's house in Columbus, Ohio, the one with the avocado green wallpaper that nobody had touched since 1987, and the radiator that clanked every 20 minutes like it was trying to join the conversation. The whole family was there. My parents, my older sister, 3 aunts and uncles, a rotating cast of cousins. The dining room table was too small for all of us, so the cousins got folding tables in the hallway. But I was 31 years old, and somehow I still ended up at the kids' table. That tells you everything you need to know about where I stood in this family. I smiled and told my aunt I was working on a consulting project, which was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. But I had learned over years of Thanksgiving dinners exactly like this one that the whole truth only made things worse. My sister looked up from her plate. She was 3 years older than me, a loan officer at a regional bank in Cleveland, and she had the particular energy of someone who had been waiting all week for this moment. "Consulting," she repeated, with that tiny pause before the word that made it sound like a euphemism for something embarrassing. "Is that what we're calling it?" My father laughed, not a mean laugh. He would have been horrified if you'd told him it was mean. Just a tired laugh, the kind that meant he agreed with her, but didn't want to be on record. My mother reached over and put more stuffing on my plate without asking. That was her version of comfort. I sat there and ate the stuffing and smiled at my aunt and let the conversation move on to my sister's recent promotion and her new condo in the Tremont neighborhood and the vacation she was planning to Portugal. I smiled through all of it. I'd had a lot of practice. What nobody at that table knew, what I hadn't told a single person in my family, was that 6 weeks earlier I had signed a contract worth $2.3 million. My company wasn't new. I had been running it for 4 years by then, quietly out of a spare bedroom in my apartment in Austin, Texas. I had moved there partly for the startup ecosystem and partly because it was far enough from Ohio that I could breathe. The business was an HR tech platform, software that helped mid-sized companies streamline their onboarding and compliance processes. Not glamorous, not the kind of thing that made people's eyes light up at parties. But it worked and it scaled, and by the time I sat at that Thanksgiving table letting my aunt pat my hand sympathetically, I had 14 employees, a 6-figure recurring revenue base, and a term sheet from a venture capital firm in San Francisco that valued my company at just under $20 million. I had not told my family because I had tried to tell them before. 2 years earlier, when the business first started generating real revenue, I had called my mother on a Sunday afternoon and told her I thought I was really building something. She had listened politely and then said, "That's wonderful, sweetheart, but what happens if it doesn't work out? You don't have a safety net." She meant well. That was the worst part. She genuinely meant well, and she still could not conceive of me as someone who built things that worked. So I stopped telling them. The Thanksgiving dinner ended the way they always did. My grandmother fell asleep in her chair before dessert. My uncle started an argument about football, and my sister and I washed dishes side by side in the kitchen in the specific silence of 2 people who have run out of things to say to each other. She handed me plates to dry, and I dried them, and neither of us mentioned the consulting comment, and that was that. I flew back to Austin the next morning. By December, the VC deal had closed. By February, we had signed 3 new enterprise clients. By April, I was on a call with a journalist. Her name was Diane, and she worked for Inc. magazine. She had found us through a piece another publication had done on women-led tech startups in secondary markets, and she wanted to do a profile, a real one. Not a quick mention in a roundup, but a full feature with a photo shoot and everything. I spent 2 weeks going back and forth with her, nervous in the way I hadn't been nervous since the first time I pitched an investor. This was different exposure. This was the kind of thing people I knew might actually read. The piece ran in the June issue. The headline was something about redefining what a tech company founder looks like. They used a photo from the shoot, me in my office, sleeves rolled up, laptop open, looking like I actually knew what I was doing. The article mentioned the valuation. It mentioned a client list. It mentioned that I had built the whole thing without a co-founder, without a trust fund, and without a single family member who believed it was possible. I had not said that last part. Diane had inferred it from something I said about building resilience. But there it was, in print, in a national magazine, implicit and undeniable. My phone started ringing the next morning. Not from my family, at first. From old college friends, a former professor, a woman I had worked with briefly at a marketing agency right out of school, who apparently still followed me on LinkedIn. People I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly warm and enthusiastic and wanting to catch up. My sister called on a Tuesday 9 days after the issue hit newsstands. I almost didn't pick up. We talked maybe 4 times a year, always slightly strained, always ending with vague plans to visit each other that neither of us followed through on. But something made me answer. "I saw the article," she said. "I figured." "You didn't tell us." "No." There was a pause. I could hear her breathing, that specific way she breathed when she was working out how to position something. "Mom is upset," she finally said. I waited. "She feels like you've been lying to us, like you had this whole other life and you were hiding it." I wasn't hiding it, I just stopped explaining it. That's the same thing in her mind. "I know." Another pause. "The article says the company is worth $20 million. That's the valuation from the last round, yeah?" "That's..." She stopped. I could hear her recalibrating. "That's a lot." "It is." "Why didn't you tell us?" And this is the part where I probably should have been gracious, where I should have said something about how I was protecting myself while I figured things out, or how I didn't want to jinx it, or some other soft explanation that would have let everyone off the hook. But I was 31 years old and I had spent a decade being the family's cautionary tale, and I was tired. "Because the last time I tried to tell you something, you described my work as figuring things out," I said. "At Thanksgiving, in front of everyone. And Mom put more food on my plate so I'd stop talking." The silence after that was different, heavier. She said she'd call me back. She didn't. My mother called that Friday. She opened with how proud she was, which took about 30 seconds, and then moved into the real agenda, which was, why hadn't I told her, and didn't I trust her? And she had always believed in me, she just worried that was different from not believing. And she wished I hadn't given that quote to the magazine about building resilience in isolation, because people were going to think the family hadn't supported me, and what would the neighbors think? I listened to all of it. When she finished, I said, "I love you. I'm glad you're proud of me. I have a board meeting in an hour, and I have to go." I didn't have a board meeting, but I did have to go. What I didn't know yet, what I had no idea about until a Monday morning in July, when I was sitting at my desk eating a breakfast sandwich and going through emails, was that 3 months earlier someone had opened a credit card in my name. I had gotten an alert from my credit monitoring service, the kind I had set up years ago because I was paranoid about identity theft. The alert flagged a new account, a Visa card with a $12,000 limit, opened in March, already carrying a balance of $8,400. I stared at the email for a long time. Then I pulled my full credit report. There were 2 accounts I didn't recognize, the Visa card and a personal loan for $6,000 that had been opened in January. Both had my social security number, my date of birth, my mother's maiden name as a security answer. Both had a billing address I recognized, my parents' house in Columbus. I sat with that information for a very long time. The thing about growing up in a family that underestimates you is that you eventually start to wonder if they're right. You spend years quietly building something to prove them wrong, and in the back of your head you keep the ledger, every dismissal and condescending laugh, every plate of stuffing meant to fill your mouth so you'd stop talking. And then one morning you're sitting at your desk with proof that someone who shares your blood looked at your social security number and decided it was a resource to use. I called my bank first, then I called the credit card company, then I called an attorney, a woman I had been introduced to through my VC firm who specialized in fraud and financial crimes. She walked me through the process calmly, like she had done it many times before, which I supposed she had. "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" she asked. "I have a strong suspicion," I said. She advised me to file a police report before confronting anyone, which I did. The detective I spoke with was matter-of-fact and slightly tired, the way people get when they see the same crimes repeat with different family members at the center. He told me that family-based identity theft was more common than most people realized, and that the fact that the billing address was my parents' house was significant. My attorney sent preservation letters to both creditors. The investigation took 11 weeks. In October, my sister called me again. Her voice was different this time. Lower, faster, like she was reading from a script she hadn't fully memorized. "I need to talk to you about something," she said. "Okay. I did something really stupid. I need you to know that I know it was stupid." I had been waiting for this call in a way. Once the letters went out and the creditors started pulling records, it was only a matter of time. I still wasn't prepared for how small her voice sounded. She told me she had done it in January, when the rumors about my funding round started circulating in the business press, and she had put together what was happening. She said she had told herself it was temporary, that she would pay it back before I ever noticed. She had needed the money, a short-term cash flow problem, her own credit cards maxed out, a loan she couldn't service. She had access to my personal information because our mother had kept a file of our documents since we were children. The kind of thing that felt protective when we were young and felt like an unlocked door when we were adults. "I was going to pay it back," she said again. "I know you were," I said, and I believed her actually. Not because it made okay, but because I knew her well enough to know she wasn't malicious. She was just someone who had looked at a door and found it open and told herself a story about why walking through it was acceptable. "What happens now?" she asked. "I've filed a police report," I said. "My attorney has been in contact with both creditors. At this point, it's out of my hands." She was quiet for a long time. "Are you going to press charges?" "I already have," I said. "The report is filed. That process has its own momentum now." She was crying by the end of the call. I stayed on the line until she stopped, because whatever she had done, she was still my sister, and I wasn't going to hang up on someone crying. But I didn't offer comfort, and I didn't tell her it would be okay, because I didn't know if it would be okay, because I didn't know if it would be. My mother called an hour later. This call was different. She was not crying. She was in the register she reserved for situations where she had decided she was the victim, clipped and wounded and slightly formal, like she was testifying. She said I was tearing the family apart. She said my sister had made a mistake and I was treating it like a crime. "It is a crime," I said. "She's your sister." "I know who she is." "You can drop the charges. You can call the detective and tell him it was a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding. She used my social security number and my credit to open accounts without my permission. That has a legal definition." "You have $20 million. I have been waiting for that one too." "The amount of money I have is not relevant to whether a crime was committed," I said. My mother told me I had changed. She said success had made me cold. She said she missed who I used to be, and I thought about the girl who sat at the kids' table at 31 years old, being asked if she was still figuring things out. And I thought about how my mother had put more food on my plate to shut me up, and I thought, I am exactly who I have always been. You just never looked closely enough. I didn't say any of that. I said I loved her, and I had to go, and I hung up. My sister was charged with identity theft and fraudulent use of credit. Her attorney negotiated it down. She pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, paid restitution, and received 3 years of probation. Her record, the part about the financial crime, would remain. The loan officer career was over, at least at her current employer. I found out from my attorney, not from my family. My father called me once in November after the plea was entered. He was quiet in a way he rarely was, not the passive agreement of Thanksgiving dinners, but something more genuine, something that cost him. He said he didn't know how to explain what had happened. He said he was sorry. He said he wasn't sure where things had gone wrong. I told him I wasn't sure either. I told him I loved him. I told him I didn't know what the next few years would look like for us, but that I wasn't going anywhere, and neither was he, and maybe we could figure out the rest slowly." He said okay. His voice cracked a little when he said it. That was the most honest conversation we had ever had. The Inc. article had a longer life than I expected. It got picked up, shared, quoted in a few other pieces about women in tech. A podcast reached out, then a speaking bureau. I did a panel at a conference in Nashville in the spring, and someone in the audience came up to me afterward, a woman about my age, bright-eyed and slightly nervous, and asked how I had kept going when nobody around me believed in it. I thought about the answer for a moment. I thought about the avocado green wallpaper and the clanking radiator and the kids' table and the plate of stuffing. "You learn to carry your own conviction," I told her, "because there will be seasons when nobody else will carry it for you, and if you wait for permission from the people who've known you longest, you'll wait forever." She wrote it down. I don't know what she did with it. I flew home to Austin that night and ordered takeout and sat on my couch with my laptop open and worked until midnight the way I did most nights, because the company didn't stop needing me just because my family had finally caught up to who I was. There was a lot more road ahead, there still is. But I am not at the kids' table anymore. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the article, not the phone calls after. It's the stuffing, my mother putting more food on my plate without asking, that small automatic gesture meant to fill the silence where my ambitions were supposed to be. She wasn't cruel. That's what took me the longest to understand. She was just someone who loved me inside the boundaries of what she could imagine for me, and what she could imagine wasn't very large. I spent years being angry about that. Then I spent years pretending I wasn't. What I eventually figured out, slowly, the way you figure out most things that matter, is that the people who underestimate you aren't always your enemies. Sometimes they're just people with smaller windows. Problem is when you start looking through their windows instead of your own. My sister made a choice that had real consequences, and those consequences followed her. I didn't engineer that. I didn't want it. But I also didn't look away from it, because looking away would have been its own kind of dishonesty. To myself, to her, to the idea that actions mean something. What you do with what you're given and what you take that isn't yours. Both of those things compound over time. I watched that play out in real time, and it was not satisfying the way I might have imagined at the kids' table in my grandmother's house. It was just sad and true and final in a way that couldn't be undone. The harder thing I had to reckon with was my own part. Not in what my sister did, that was hers entirely, but in the silence I had kept for so long. I had convinced myself it was self-protection, and it was, partly, but it was also fear. Fear that if I said the thing out loud and they dismissed it again, I wouldn't be able to keep going. So I kept the whole world I was building to myself, locked in a spare bedroom in Austin, and I let them go on believing the story they'd already written about me because it was easier than fighting for a different one. What I know now is that the fight isn't with them. It was never with them. The fight is with the version of yourself that learned, somewhere along the way, to need their approval before you could trust your own judgment. That's the work. Quieter than launching a company, harder than any pitch meeting, just learning to carry your own conviction when no one around you is carrying it with you. I think about the woman who came up to me after the Nashville panel. Bright-eyed, nervous, writing things down. I don't know what she's building. I don't know if she has a family that believes in her, or a family that puts more stuffing on her plate to shut her up. But I know that the capacity to keep going anyway. Not recklessly, not without doubt, but with clear eyes and a willingness to do the work even when nobody's watching. That's not a gift you're born with. It's a muscle. You build it the same way you build anything, by using it when it's hard, especially when it's hard, until it stops feeling like courage and starts feeling like just who you are. I am not at the kids' table anymore. That sentence sounds simple. It took me a decade to earn it.